Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us early this morning. I'm Terry Donaldson. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Huntington's virtual Sunday service. It's good to be together. We are streaming live from multiple locations, so please be patient with any technical mishaps you might see or hear. We're using Zoom's meeting format so we can all see each other. We'd like to extend a special welcome today to visitors who may be joining our virtual service for the first time, as well as any newcomers who are returning. If you are new to our congregation and want to speak with someone to learn more about us, please contact our office administrator, Lauren Knoll, at office@uufh.org. If you have a pastoral matter, you can contact our minister, Reverend Jude Geiger, at minister@uufh.org. We'll put this information in the chat during the service as well. Know that whoever you are, whomever you love, and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. We have a few announcements this morning. The auction gala has moved to April permanently. The plans are made. The website is ready. Now we need your donations. You can go to the auction gala button on the UUFH website or to the flash for the link to the website. Then register and type in your item or items. Very easy. Amy Olander will be in the fellowship hour after the service to answer your questions. Our social justice ministry has endorsed the People's Plan, a set of public safety recommendations developed by community-led coalitions with the input of hundreds of Long Islanders. It is a comprehensive plan that presents 12 proposals for structural reform to reimagine policing and public safety to ensure that Long Island is safe for all Long Islanders. Please consider endorsing this plan. The more people who endorse it, the more our public officials are likely to take it seriously. The Long Island Poor People's Campaign's Political Education Committee is pleased to announce the first in a series of webinars addressing some of the systemic injustices here on Long Island. The webinar series begins on Wednesday, March 17th at 6 p.m. and is presented in conjunction with the Islamic Circle of Long Island Council for Social Justice. Today, March 14th at 11:30 a.m., Reverend Jude begins part 1 of a Zoom book discussion on Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States for Young People by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, adapted by Jean Mendoza and Debbie Reese. We'll put the link in the chat at the end of the service. Next Saturday, March 20th, mark your calendars. The UUFH has the distinct honor to conduct the ordination of Greta Jo Seidel, our former ministerial intern. It is truly our congregation's privilege. It will be a virtual ceremony on Zoom hosted by us and will begin at 4 p.m. Information, as well as the link, is available on our Facebook page, as well as the Ordination of Greta Jo Seidel Facebook page. Please join us on Saturday, March 20th at 4 p.m. on Zoom. For more information on all of these announcements, please visit our website, uufh.org. And now I invite you to relax your body, quiet your mind as we breathe deeply together and settle into our time of worship. Please join me in saying our mission statement. In religious community, we nurture our individual spirits through caring for one another and helping to heal the world. And now join me in singing our affirmation, Common Ground.
On different roads we travel here to meet as one on common ground, to seek the truth with open minds, with loving hearts and helping hands.
Good morning, everyone. Happy daylight savings time. Congratulations. You are the ones that are here today. You passed that test. I imagine we'll have an influx of guests for the benediction as well. Our chalice lighting words this morning are from the Reverend Ian Rydell. Come, come, whoever you are. Do you hear that voice calling you, calling us? That voice which calls us together here today in this place made holy by our presence and by the sacred breath we share in our singing and speaking and silence. That voice which calls us to remember that we are not alone and that we are inextricably linked to all other life, woven into a vast tapestry of existence, of which we are a powerful, integral, and holy part. And just as we've been called together here today, we act as the voice, the heart, the hands of another call, the call to walk with the wanderers, sing and dance with the worshipers, proclaim the memory of those who have taken their leave, wrap the despairing and the broken in the arms of love and community, and hold the hands of all of us who have broken our vows and call us back again and again to the covenant and work of justice, humility, and steadfast faithfulness. For this, we are here together today. So my friends, come yet again, come. Come, let us worship together. Our story this morning is from a Hindu parable, and it's called The Dog and the Heartless King. There once was a king who thought that everyone should always do exactly what he said and that he didn't have to care about anyone else. After all, he was the king. What did he care about? Why would he care about anyone else? Even the people of his kingdom, what did he care? They existed only to serve his needs, or so he thought. As a result of his selfish ideas, everyone in the kingdom was poor except him. He had more money than even he needed, but he got his wealth by imposing huge taxes on the people, and he never gave anything back. He did not build schools or hospitals or repair the roads. Instead, he maintained enormous armies and built huge palaces for himself. Meanwhile, the people became poorer and poorer, and hungrier, and more miserable. But the king didn't care. He had his, so why should he care about his people? One day, the gods saw what was happening and decided to teach the king a lesson. They sent Lord Krishna in the form of a hunter who came to the king offering him a gift, an enormous hunting dog. Now, the king enjoyed hunting. He had an enormous stable of horses and lots of dogs, but this dog was different somehow. It was the biggest dog the king had ever seen. It was even big enough to hunt tigers. So he accepted the gift. As soon as the king accepted the dog, it began to bark. Now, this dog's bark was not an ordinary bark. It was so loud that it actually shook the palace walls. and it wouldn't stop barking. It barked and barked, and no one could stop it. "What's wrong with your dog?" the king shouted to the hunter. "He's not my dog, he's your dog now," the hunter shouted back, "and he's hungry." "No problem," shouted the king, and he ordered the servants to bring as much food as the dog could eat. But no matter how much food was brought, the dog gobbled it up and continued barking. As you can imagine, the king was not happy. "Take your dog back and leave this kingdom immediately," the king ordered. "I can't. He's not my dog," the hunter replied. "Besides, I've been sent here by those who are greater and far more powerful than you. You're stuck with it." The king started to be frightened. "What can I give the dog to satisfy him?" "Only one thing will satisfy this dog," said the hunter. "So long as its enemies are loose in the kingdom, it will be hungry and will keep barking." "No problem," said the king. "Who are his enemies?" "His enemies are those who keep the people of his kingdom hungry. They're those who are taking most of the kingdom's food and don't leave enough for the people, parents and children, the elderly, the sick. They are those who take all the people's money and do nothing with it. The children cannot learn in school, for there are no schools. The sick simply die in the streets because there are no hospitals. And all the while, these greedy people simply get richer and richer, while the people get poorer and poorer. As long as this keeps up, the dog will continue to bark. Get used to it." The king was terrified at this because he knew that the hunter was talking about him. It had never occurred to him that he was doing anything wrong. How could he be doing anything that would displease the gods? He was the king. He called in all of his advisors and counselors and asked them what could be done. They tried to think of something, but because of the racket from the dog's barking, they couldn't think. They told the king that the only thing to be done was to feed the people, build the schools and hospitals, and repair the roads. Well, by now, the king had realized that since this was no ordinary dog, this could be no ordinary hunter. It must be Lord Krishna, and that convinced him. He ordered his servants to open his barns and warehouses and granaries and to go through the kingdom feeding the hungry. He opened his treasuries and used the gold to build schools and hospitals and roads, and he sent his own advisors out into the kingdom to teach and heal the people. This took a lot of time, and all that time the dog continued to bark. But at last the day came when the people were no longer hungry and every village had a school and a hospital. And when that day came, the dog stopped barking and lay down quietly at the king's feet. Everyone was happy and at peace with themselves and with their neighbors, and the king had learned his lesson. Now, this story is an ancient story, but it is so very easy to see how relevant it is to today. Where is the dog barking? How are the sick cared for? How are our kids cared for? And where does the money and the army stay? Keep this story in your head and your heart as we go through the service. It'll come up a couple more times.
Our first reading this morning is entitled "The Chalice of Our Being" by Reverend Richard Gilbert. Each morning, we must hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and give back. Dag Hammarskjöld. Each morning, we hold out our chalice of being to be filled with the graces of life that abound. Air to breathe, food to eat, companions to love, beauty to behold, art to cherish, causes to serve. They come in ritual procession, these gifts of life. Whether we deserve them, we cannot know or say, for they are poured out for us. Our task is to hold steady the chalice of our being. We carry the chalice with us as we go, either meandering aimlessly or with destination in our eye. We share its abundance, if we have any sense, reminding others as we remind ourselves of the contents of the chalice we don't deserve. Water from living streams fills it. if only we hold it out faithfully. We give back, if we can, something of ourselves, some love, some beauty, some grace, some gift. We give back in gratitude, if we can, something like what is poured into our chalice of being for those who abide with us and will follow. Each morning, we hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, to give back. I invite us all to sing Spirit of Life with our virtual choir. Following the song, we'll enter into a time of silence and then prayer. As you participate at home, remember that it's not about the perfection of silence, but the intention. Join with me in singing now.
My prayer this morning comes from the writings of Reverend Tess Bomberger. In all moments and places. O divine spirit, healer of our hurts, consoler of our sorrows, vibrant light of happiness, birther of all life and gentle ways of death, hear our prayer. We raise our heart to you as do the ancient redwoods rooted in the ground, swaying in the wind. We praise and thank you for our life, gifts of body and essence, strength to bear life's burdens, grace to dance life's joys. We praise and thank you for our life, gifts of eyes and heart that fill with beauty smiling, or with pain and sadness weeping. We praise and thank you for our life, gifts of ears to hear, words of grace and wisdom to listen to and lighten the burdens of others. We praise and thank you for our life, our voice, to sing out praises, to speak my truths and visions, to share ourselves with others. Praise and thank you for our life. Gifts of all our senses, rhythm of our heartbeat, rise and fall of our breathing. To will, to live with passion, serenity, joy. Spirit, guide us to a deeper knowing of your presence in the world. Show us the deeper meanings of the patterns of our years. Help us regard ourselves and others with eyes of calm compassion. Teach us to learn patience with their failings and our own. Help us to accept the mold and fashion of our life through marching years. In the names of all who perceive your transcendent presence, in trees and brooks and mountains, in work and play and resting, in all moments and places between. Amen, and blessed be. We now invite the gathering to lift up the names of those we wish to hold in all our hearts this hour. Michael, Gary, Naomi, Don, Sue, Aaron, Katie, Gary, Tom and Thomas, Jacqueline, Jesse, Diane, Lenny, Connie, Rose, Jeff and Jessica, Tom, Mary and Eric, Earl and Martha, Spencer and Aunt Annabelle, John, for all these names spoken aloud, and for all those that are written silently on the tablets of our hearts, we pray. As I talk about this next portion, we will be honoring all the lives of those in this nation, in this world, that have been impacted by COVID. I can hear Lord Krishna's giant hunting dog barking at the enemies of the nation. A year ago this week, we closed down our Sunday services in person. It was the wisest thing that could have been done. We did not yet know what we did not yet know. That decision of the board saved lives. I know by around that time, at least half a dozen of our own members had contracted COVID. I could not imagine what would have happened if we had one more in-person service before we realized. Right now, this time last year, I would be making the decision to evacuate from my Spanish language immersion in Mexico for my sabbatical, without being able to obtain a mask, traveling through 3 airports to return home to the US epicenter of the pandemic, Queens. I'd be worrying if I was going to get sick and if I'd be bringing the virus home to my husband, who had already safely quarantined at that point for over 2 weeks. The clock would be reset for both of us by that decision, since our former administration threatened to close the southern border indefinitely. He would not, of course. There was money to be made in tourism. In contrast, my fellow European students studying with me would receive calls directly to their phones from their governments offering to send direct planes to them to safely evacuate them back home. As in our story this morning, the king has money for armies and wealth, but not healthcare for the people. What we were told for all of us would only be a 2-week stay on work, turn into 8 weeks, then would turn into fits and starts. It would only create more surges in the pandemic and take more lives. In Queens back then, masks and gloves would litter the streets. We would see that when we would walk our dog around the block and return into near total isolation for months. While ambulance sirens would blare every 30 minutes or sooner, all through the night, the right-wing media would gaslight our nation into thinking were about the common cold. Meanwhile, we were spraying down our groceries, all of us, and wiping down our counters because no one knew if it would matter or not. So we did it. We hold in our hearts all the frontline workers, all the teachers, the grocery store workers who never had the privilege of a quarantine, our trash collectors, our recycling collectors, and so on. All the students that have had to adapt to the most overwhelming trauma, and their parents who are having to adapt to that adaptation. We hold all that in our hearts. As of this morning, there have been 29.4 million known cases of COVID in the US alone, 120 million worldwide, and 525,000 dead from COVID specifically in the US alone. Though we know not how many more died from other maladies that otherwise would have lived if it were not also for having COVID. We pause now at this 1-year mark to honor all the dead and the survivors of this pandemic. On January 20th, during the national service to commemorate the then 300,000 dead, you congregations across the nation rang bells at night. The Reverend Lee Allison Bagzula, created this meditation for this commemoration. Please join with me now in 3 minutes of a listening meditation.
Here in reverence now we gather, for the blessings we have known, with a pledge to one another, that we journey not alone. Joy and sorrow make us one, into all that lives and dies. Let us all love God. legends living song. Courage bids us lift our eyes upward to the shining skies. Hope calls us on. Hope calls us on. Hope calls us on. Loyal guides in love and duty, lead us with a trusted light. Blessed are they whose inward beauty shows the path of truth and light. Honor is their earthly prize. By their work we realize faith calls us on. Faith calls us on.
We have shared a radiant hour,
We have
where
shared
the truth has made us free.
freedom and truth.
In the Spirit's gracious power,
Spirit of grace,
dreamed of good that God shall
be
be.
with us forever.
Right the path before us now.
Ever bright is the path.
Joyful pilgrims now we rise. Life calls us
Life calls us on.
on. Life calls us on.
Yes, life calls us on. Oh, yes, life calls us on. Life calls us on.
Thank you, Jude and Jay and the choir. That was very moving. And now it is my pleasure to invite our own Helen Boxwell, founder and executive director of H2 Empower, our split plate charity of March. Helen has been a member of UUFH for 30 plus years and an active member of the Social Justice Ministry. H2 Empower has focused their efforts on education and sustainable development in Ethiopia and Burundi for the past 15 years. Among their efforts have been creation of libraries, classrooms, and input of water into the public schools. Some of our UUFH members have traveled with Helen to Ethiopia and Burundi and have volunteered their services in schools. And now Helen will share a few words about H2 Empower to inspire your giving.
Good morning. First, I want to thank the fellowship for your constant support of H2 Empower and our work in Ethiopia and Burundi. You've helped us build a community library and computer center. You can see the children in a slide. Some of you have joined us on trips to both countries, and some of you support our work or individuals year after year. Here's a shout out to the Sussman family, Marisa Complete, Maria Nelson, Jackie Agdorn, Arndt Monge, and so many others. I'm deeply grateful to all of you. In Ethiopia, our projects come through the schools telling us what they need. Often it's water and sanitation. Worldwide, 2.1 billion people lack access to safe drinking water. 61 million people in Ethiopia. In rural areas, the children or women of a family walk up to 3 hours to find a water source, which is often contaminated. This kind of water is the main cause for illnesses like diarrhea, bilharzia, or typhoid fever, especially life-threatening to children. These keep children out of school and millions get sick or die of waterborne diseases every year. There are no daily showers or hand washing. How do you clean the dishes or clothes? Often we see sights of girls like this girl taking water from a mud puddle and then bringing it home. I'll never forget being in the library and going by the water fountain. It was shut off. The guard saw I wanted water and ran to open it. I washed my hands and some children ran over to drink and drink and drink. They were washing their faces and filling empty water bottles and getting so crazed. And the guard was trying to hit them because they were so excited. I stopped him and said to the principal that we had to open the water for them. They keep it closed because they have to pay for the water and don't want the kids to play in it. But the children were so not only excited, but so needy, obviously, for this little drop of water. He saw the need and promised to open it at recess every day, saying, "Water is their right." I was told they are still opening it up daily for the children. We can keep these children healthy by providing potable water and clean sanitation. We're fortunate because we don't have to dig a well, which is very expensive. We just have to connect to a main pipe. We're putting this water into a school and permanent sanitation for 1,500 girls in a primary school that has 3 shifts, including night school for those that work. Now they only have 3 very old stalls. There will be a changing room for older girls as well. You can help these eager and bright children stay healthy and stay in school. Thank you very much for your constant generous support and caring. Your gift will have a permanent impact on thousands of girls in Hosanna, Ethiopia.
Thank you, Helen. You can send a check to the office or donate through our website as seen on the screen. You can also donate through the Give Plus Church app, which can be found on the App Store or Google Play. Please be as generous as you can. Our second reading this morning is entitled, "What the Clamorings For?" by Reverend Tracy Robinson Harris. In conversations about the Initiative for Greater Diversity, our Unitarian Universalist Association-wide commitment to become more inclusive, one of the questions that inevitably arose was, what do we want diversity for? What is our motivation? Perhaps it is guilt. Guilt over the injustices of racism, heterosexism, classism. A commitment to diversity would make me feel better, that is, less guilty. Perhaps it is a sense of responsibility to deal with my prejudices and somehow participate in bringing greater justice. A commitment to diversity would hold us responsible, make us do the right thing. Perhaps it is that nagging call to seek wholeness. Given the partiality of all points of view, given the diversity of truth, given our calling to live our lives religiously, given these, a commitment to diversity is nothing more or less than honoring the call to seek wholeness in my life and in our collective life. African-American feminist, author, teacher, Bell Hooks asks the question this way: what is all this clamoring after difference? All the clamoring is about seeking wholeness. Guilt leads to angry denial and inaction. Responsibility leads to grudging good works. The call to seek wholeness has room for acknowledging feelings of guilt and anger and frustration, room for accepting appropriate responsibility, and plenty of room for moving toward personal and communal transformation. All the clamoring is for each person, each perspective, each truth to be granted sufficient respect so that we truly listen to those ideas and allow ourselves to be truly challenged by them. All the clamoring is for us to recognize that our lives are intertwined, so intertwined that each is accountable to the other. Each particular story, truth, calls us to accountability, calls me to accountability for my life, my limits, my individual, and our collective transformation. All the clamoring is for truth. I need you. I need you, who you are, the experiences and perspectives you bring, so that I may know truth beyond my partial truth. All the clamoring is for justice. We need each other and what we can all do together for justice.
Thank you, Terry. Bell Hooks is one of my favorite writers, and she is so clear and gets to the heart of the matter. So, who needs compassion anyway? It's a virtue that asks us to make our lives a little bit more difficult, a little more complicated, without any obvious tangible benefit, some would say. It rarely seems to ask it of us either when times are easy. Why should we share in the suffering of others? Give a little more of yourself even when it seems you have less to give? Why should we even feel the compunction to do so? Our second principle isn't just about asking us to do something, it's asking us to feel like we ought to be doing something. Our Words for All Ages this morning explores that very question. A rewriting of traditional Hindu texts, we learn of a king who has it all. There was once a king who thought that everyone should always do exactly what he said, and that he didn't have to care about anyone else, even the people of his kingdom. What did he care? They only exist to serve his needs, or so he thought. We all know that king from time to time, from generation to generation. Never goes away, just the new face. Hoarding all the wealth of the people, he closes the coin away, and along with it, the prosperity of his kingdom. With its lack of use, schools, hospitals, home, and hearth all suffer. The king certainly has all material goods he could wish, the largest army and the most grandiose palaces, but even he can't use it all. It lays fallow, and so does his kingdom. So does the hope for something more. Like last week, our story revolves around the actions of a trickster figure, this time Lord Krishna. The wider stories of Krishna appear across a broad range of Hindu theological and philosophical traditions. He appears in these stories in various guises as prankster, model lover, godchild, divine hero, or sometimes the supreme being. In our story this morning, he may be divine, but he's also a hero of a sort, and certainly a prankster, a trickster figure. In a brilliant play, he feeds the voracious king yet another gift, this time the largest hunting dog the king has ever seen. Only the dog has the propensity for food as the king does for wealth. When asked to take the gift back, Krishna refuses. I can't, he's not my dog. Besides, I've been sent here by those who are greater and far more powerful than you. You're stuck with it. Essentially, this is your situation, your problem, and you need to live in it. There's no one else who's going to live it for you. This hunting dog is a giant-sized emblem of anything we turn into a problem in our minds. There are actual issues going on around him, like hungry people, poor schools, and raging wars. But the king is focused on the problem he's created for himself. One giant, loud, hungry dog. How often are we that king in our own lives? Instead of acting to resolve the pain in and around us, we fixate on thinking about issues that we've generated for ourselves. In that way, we might be able to relate to the character of the king in the story. His actions are very normal human things to do and probably a little insane. And I can't help by reading this story again in light of all the pain and suffering this past year of COVID that could have been avoided if we just fed the needs of that dog that was warning our nation of its enemy. I feel that the giant hunting dog in the story, though, is also a practical answer to the questions I posed earlier that ask, why should we share in the suffering of others? I say practical while promising to get to the spiritual and moral answers shortly. If we understand compassion to mean a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering, then showing compassion is simply outwardly recognizing the inward truth. Whether we're aware of it or not, we suffer along with the suffering of the people around us. The king had all he could ask for, but he also had that dog, which the story tells us he, at first, also coveted. Along with his appetite for more, the king picked up the symbol for that appetite as well. A hunting dog that could not be satiated so long as the king continued to need more. King's opulence, although seemingly pleasant, left him closed off from the genuine human contact and did nothing to cease his craving. Like his people subjected to his rule, he was ultimately trapped by his needs and ironically left with no one to be compassionate toward him either. Narcissism is a trap. All around is ruined and you gain little. He created and perpetuated a reality for his kingdom that matched his own psychological dysfunction. Practically speaking, living without compassion for others obscured the king, obscures us from realizing our own addictions. In his case, the practical solution was to rectify his voracious and hoarding habits. Likewise, his hunting dog would do the same. But that solution was difficult to come to. He called in all of his advisors and counselors and asked them what could be done. They tried to think of something, but because of the racket from the dog's barking, they couldn't think. Although it's a bit of an unkind barb in the story, I can't help but think it's so true of our worldly leaders who've cut funding for schools, healthcare this year, and affordable housing, while raising spending for military and offer support for big bonuses, divorced of actual productivity or competency. The story talks about taxation. If we were to throw it forward a couple thousand years, it would be about this. Their hunger for power and wealth makes it so that they can't think straight. In these cases, compassion helps us to think straight. The promise or the challenge of compassion, of equity, of justice, is that they help us to think straight. Practically, it helps us to see the world more clearly so that our actions reflect what is actually going on. That's the practical or utilitarian argument. Compassion bends us toward facing reality. To better see the moral arguments, we can take a look at the other aspects of our second principle. We covenanted to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And some of us would say all relations. Our reading in this morning speaks about that clamoring. Why are we clamoring for justice? Why are we clamoring for equity? And Bell Hooks and Reverend Tracy Robinson Harris answers us by helping us to find wholeness. It's part of the writing of our eighth principle that we're discerning this year. But it's also about recognizing that our individual perspective, as Bell Hooks says, is a singular truth, a partial truth. And by making space through equity, through justice, through diversity, as in the last reading, we're not only finding wholeness, we're getting closer to a fuller truth. From our past examples, we already see how compassion reflects the reality of life. In our story this morning, equity is easily the outcome of compassion. The solution to the problem of the lack of compassion is equity, allowing folks their fair share. All may not have the same, and we're all born with different talents, but this story suggests that severely limiting access to basic human and social needs harms all, not just those so limited. The notion of affecting all relates morally to notions of justice, or what it often religiously understood as moral righteousness. A term, righteousness, has a lot of connotations, some of which in the modern era doesn't take well. It comes up often in English translations of the Hebrew scriptures. However, how we understand the term differs today than it did in biblical days. Another word, solidarity, would be more helpful to our modern sensibilities. Biblical righteousness, particularly in the texts that refer to right living, really refers to religious teachings that call for a deeper living into community. In the Hebrew scriptures, there's a series of stories among many other lessons and messages. They also teach us to be a people. Solidarity, righteousness or justice, are words that call us to consider ourselves in light of others. Righteousness is considering ourselves in light of others. They fashion us into more than a singular consciousness, but help us to recognize that we are part of something more. There's also a moral sense of responsibility in both our story and our second principle. Practically speaking, only the king could resolve the problem of the hunting dog. But the story tells us that Krishna was sent by those far more powerful than the king to deliver that story, that dog. Whatever we see those forces as, the story tells us that something beyond the king has put this responsibility squarely on his shoulders to bear. Whether this be the demands of the gods, as in the story or tradition, or the implicit expectation of that breath of life that blows across us all, the onus is on the king. The onus is on us. Our second principle calls for the same thing. We have covenanted to affirm and promote. In other words, we have committed ourselves to as a religious people to live into justice, equity, and compassion, to live into it. It's a promise and it's a challenge. Will our actions match our words and our promises? We may not all see the same thing as the right solution to a given situation, but we are freely covenanting to accept responsibility to live in solidarity, to seek right behavior in response to our human relations. When the giant, loud, hungry dog, which is what we have all coveted all along, comes our way, we covenant to take on our fair share of the cleanup. It makes sense to do so as it relates to how the world works, and it matches our agreed upon commitments, even though it is often so very tough to do. Krishna's reference to those far greater and more powerful than the king hints at a spiritual component. The gods or the supreme being is likely what Krishna is referring to within Hindu tradition. It's also a marker for the reality that the world is not about only us. That's the fulcrum point to spiritual action. Even when it seems like what's happening in the world is all about us, it's not. We may be involved, but we're never in the spotlight, except only in our mind. And when our mind tells us that, it's a lie. So if opening up to the beyond me is a spiritual trajectory, what's the spiritual course of action or our next move? Our story this morning offers a spiritual argument as well. The resolution to the story of the dog and the heartless king is that when that day came, the dog stopped barking and lay down quietly at the king's feet. Everyone was happy and at peace with themselves and with their neighbors. I love it that the story tells us that everyone was happy and at peace with themselves first, then with their neighbors. So often we seek to remedy internal disquiet by projecting it out onto the world around us. In those fantasies, we need to fix others first, knowing that we can't really fix anyone else. We don't have the power to ever do so. Aren't we just delaying real change? We'll never get to changing our actions if we forever wait for our others to do so first. So maybe a little bit of showing compassion starts with showing compassion to ourselves first. So we talked a little bit about that last week. It's a progression from last week's sermon on our first principle, particularly in how it relates to self-worth. Compassion can be a remedy for a lack of self-worth. Again, if we ought to show it to our others, we ought to show it to ourselves. In fact, our story suggests that all the world's solutions originate from self-transformation. Dalai Lama has a quote that says, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. For me, justice, equity, and compassion are expressions of love. My personal theology, as we come to a close of this service, is love-centered. That is to say, God-centered for me. I find the sacred in expressions of love, and those expressions lead me toward the divine. They help me to be more present. Christian theologian Carter Hayward, she writes that love is a choice, not simply or necessarily, excuse me, love is a choice, not simply or necessarily a rational choice, but rather a willingness to be present to others without pretense or guile. Love is a conversion to humanity, a willingness to participate with others in the healing of a broken world and broken lives. Love is the choice to experience life as a member of the human family, a partner in the dance of life. She's got it right. Love, that which I would call the promise of justice, equity, and compassion, return us to being human. They situate us as a people. We're not widgets or cogs of further production. We're not inherently flawed or evil, and thereby destined to worsen the quality of life of those around us. And most importantly, we're not alone. Amen, and blessed be. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. For those who see God, may God be with us. For those who embrace life, may life return our affections. For those who seek a right path, may a way be found and the courage to take it step by step. For this is the day we are given. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Amen.
Remember, don't sign off. You can stay on and join us in a few moments for some informal gathering at our fellowship hour right here on the same Zoom link. Please enjoy this beautiful day. If chilly, it is sunny.